Welcome, everyone. This will be the first broadcast. I'm going to read a book, and this is going to be my literary broadcast. We'll do some more of the sports stuff later, but it's a book that I feel is essential during this time period for us to really be able to understand the world we're in, and it's important to learn because a lot of people haven't read this book. So I'm going to be reading, and this will be on my podcast as well, which will be a reading of George Orwell's 1984. First chapter, first reading. Chapter 1. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his church nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent the swirl of gritty dust from entertaining along with him. The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end of it, colored past poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face, more than a meter wide, the face of a man of about 45, with a heavy black mustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying to lift. Even at the best of times, it was seldom working. At the present, the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week. The flat was 7 flights up. The flat is like an apartment. And Winston, who was 39 and had varicose ulcer above his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eye is following you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you, the caption beneath it ran. Inside the flat, a fruity voice was reading out a list of figures which had something to do with the production of the pig iron. The voice came with an oblong metal plaque, like a dulled mirror, with formed part of the surface of the right hand. Winston turned a switch, and the voice sank somewhat. Though the words were distinguishable, the instrument, the telescreen, it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. He moved over to the window, a smallish, frail figure, the meaningless of his body merely emphasized by the blue overalls which were uniform of the party. His hair was very fair, his face naturally sanguine, his skin roughened by coarse soap and blunt razor blades in the cold of winter that had just ended. Outside, even though the shut window pane, the world looked cold. Down the street, the little eddies of wind were whirling dust and torn paper into spirals, and though the sun was shining and the sky a harsh blue, there seemed to be no color in anything, except the posters that were plastered everywhere. The black mustachioed face gazed down from every commanding corner. There was one on the house front immediately opposite. Big Brother is watching you, the caption said. While the dark eyes looked deep into Winston's own, down the street level, another poster torn at one corner flapped fitfully in the wind, alternately covering and uncovering the single word INGSOC. In the far distance, a helicopter skimmed down between the roofs, hovered for an instant like a blue bottle, and darting away with the curving light. Very similar to the drones that are coming over cities. It was the police patrol snooping into people's windows. The patrol did not matter, however. Only the thought police mattered. The thought police was the ones that are watching over you. Behind Winston's back, the voice from the telescreen was still babbling away about pig iron and overfulfillment of the 9th 3-year plan. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously any sound the Winston made above the level of very low whisper would be picked up by it. Moreover, So long as he remained with the field of vision which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. That is because they're listening to everything you're doing, much like we have with computers now, um, and cameras everywhere. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment, how often, or on what system. The thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time. But at any rate, they could plug into your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to did live, from the habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every movement scrutinized. Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though, as he knew, even a back can be revealing. A kilometer away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and white above grimly landscape. This he thought was a sort of vague distaste. This was London, chief city of Airstrip 1, itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory that should tell him whether London had always been quite like this. Where there are always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with bulks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard, and their roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy garden walls sagging in all directions. The bomb sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air and the willow herb straggled over the heaps of rubble. The places where the bombs had cleared a larger patch and there had sprung up sordid colonies of wooden dwellings like chicken houses. It was no use, he could not remember. Nothing remained of his childhood except a series of bright lit table, occurring no background and mostly unintelligible. The Ministry of Truth, the Mini-True, in Newspeak. Newspeak was the official language of Oceania, just so you know. For a calendar, you could see more at the end, the appendix. If you happen to have 1984, you can see that. You'll see it later on. Was startlingly different from any other object in sight. It was an enormous pyramidal structure of glittering white concrete, soaring up terrace after terrace. 300 meters into the air where Winston stood, it was just possible to read, picked out on the white face in elegant lettering, the three slogans of the party: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. The Ministry of Truth contained, it was said, 3,000 rooms above the ground level and corresponding ramifications below. Scattering about London, there were just 3 other buildings of similar size and appearance. So completely they dwarfed the surrounding architecture that the roof, the Victorian mansions, you could see all 4 of them simultaneously. They were the homes of the 4 ministries between which entire apparatus of the government was divided. The Ministry of Truth, which concerned itself with news, entertainment, education, and fine arts. The Ministry of Peace, which concerned itself with war. The Ministry of Love, which maintained law and order. The Ministry of Plenty, which was responsible for economic affairs. Their names in Newspeak: Mini True, Mini Pax, Mini Love, Mini Plenty. The Ministry of Love was the really frightening one. There were no windows in it at all. Winston had never been inside the Ministry of Love, nor within half a kilometer of it. It was a place impossible to enter except on official business, and then only by penetrating through a maze of barbed wire entanglements, steel doors, and hidden machine gun nests. Even the streets leading up to its outer barriers were roamed by gorilla-faced guards in black uniforms armed with jointed truncheons. Winston turned around abruptly. He had set his features into the expression of quiet optimism, which it advisable to wear when facing the telescreen. He crossed the room into the tiny kitchen. By leaving the ministry at this time of day, he had sacrificed his lunch in the canteen and was aware that there was no food in the kitchen except a hunk of dark-colored bread, which had got to be saved for tomorrow's breakfast. He took down the shelf of the bottle of colorless liquid with a plain white label marked Victory Gin. It gave off a sickly, oily smell as of the Chinese rice spirit. Winston poured out nearly a teacup full, nerved himself for a shock, and gulped down like a dose of medicine. Instantly, his face turned scarlet and water ran out of his eyes. This stuff was like nitric acid, and moreover, swallowing in one had the sensation of being hit on the back of a head with a rubber club. The next moment, however, the burning in his belly died and the world began to look more cheerful. He took a cigarette from a crumpled packet marked Victory Cigarettes and incautiously held it upright, whereupon the tobacco fell onto the floor. With the next, he was more successful. He went back to the living room and sat at a small table that stood to the left of the telescreen. From the table drawer, he took out a pen holder, a bottle of ink, and a thick quarto-sized blank book with a red back and marbled cover. For some reason, the telescreen in the living room was in an unusual position. Instead of being placed as was normal in the end wall, where it could command the whole room, it was longer wall opposite the window. Winston was now sitting, and which, when the flats were built, had probably been intended to hold bookshelves. By sitting in the alcove and keeping well back, Winston was able to remain outside and the range of the telescreen, so far as the sight went. He could be heard, of course, but so long as he stayed in the present position, he could not be seen. It was partly the unusual geography of the room that had suggested to him the thing that he was now about to do. But it had also been suggested by the book he had just taken out of the drawer. It was a peculiarly beautiful book. It was smooth, creamy paper, a little yellowed by age, was a kind that had not been manufactured for at least 40 years past. He could guess, however, that the book was much older than that. He had seen it lying in the window of the frowsy little junk shop in the slummy quarter of the town, just where he didn't remember, and had been stricken immediately by overwhelming desire to possess it. Party members were supposed not to go into ordinary shops, dealing on the free market, it was called. But the rule was not strictly kept. Because there were various things such as shoelaces and razor blades, which it was impossible to get a hold of in any other way. He had given a quick glance up and down the street and then had slipped inside and bought the book for $2.50. The good old days. At the time, he was not conscious of wanting for any particular purpose. He had carried it guiltily home in his briefcase. Even with nothing written in it, it was a compromising possession. The thing that he was about to do was not to open a diary. This was not illegal. Nothing was illegal since there were no longer any laws. But if detected, it was reasonably certain that it would be punished by death or at least by 25 years in forced labor camp. Winston fitted a nib into the pen holder and sucked it to get the grease off. The pen was an archaic instrument seldom used for signatures, and he had procured one furtively with some difficulty, simply because of the feeling that the beautiful creamy paper deserved to be written on with a real nib instead of being scratched with an ink pencil. Actually, he was not used to writing by hand. Apart from the very short notes, it was usual to dictate everything in a speak right, which of course impossible for the present purpose. He dipped the pen into ink and then faltered for a second. A tremor had gone through his bowels. To mark the paper was the decisive act. In clumsy letters, he wrote, April 4th, 1984. We'll stop there. You can see that he's in the world of high surveillance. And in the world of high surveillance, he's looking for freedoms that they no longer have. And so this is the first 10 pages. I wanted to read that each day. I'm going to try and read 10 pages if I can. It'll also be on our podcast, which will be a reading of George Orwell's 1984. I think it's mandatory reading for everybody. It's amazing the insight that he had over, I guess it was 100 years ago or close to it. And to write something that could be so prominent today. A couple of interesting things. It's great to have people on. I'm glad Angela liked it. Thank you. I want to make sure people get educated on everything. Robin, it was mandatory reading in high school, middle school. Yeah, it's amazing how many people don't read this anymore. So take a look at 1984, and we'll come back and we'll read this tomorrow night. That's the end of the first reading, the first 10 pages of George Orwell's 1984.